welcome to the Good Talk Podcast, where we remind you of the joy of life, the love of God, and the possibilities that lie ahead. Pete here with Jordyn.
Hi.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
I am great because this is episode 16.
Yep.
And it's called Fighting Fair.
Yeah, we're still on our relationship goals series. This is the second week. So if you missed the first week, go back and listen to that. We talked about love languages. Week 2, we are talking about
how to get the love you want.
Yep. How to get the love you want was week 1. This is kind of about conflict and fighting fair.
Fighting fair. I'm excited
Love
about
it.
this one.
Yeah. Are you though?
No, not really. I don't
We
like
hate conflict. He hates it more than I do.
Yeah. And also, we're continuing our little contest for virtual double dates. So we, for the whole month of the whole month of February, I wish it was July.
I know. We're dreaming for the warmth. Yeah.
Whole month of February, we're going to do virtual double dates, one a week. Mm-hmm. And we already selected the week 1 winner.
Yep, Bruce and Kim.
Yay, Bruce and Kim.
Yay, they're engaged. So I'm excited to talk to them.
Yeah, so we're just going to randomly pick a couple a week. If you want to be entered into that, if you've already sent your email, you don't have to.
Yeah.
We'll keep you in for the whole month.
You're still in the drawing all month.
If you want to get in that drawing, just do
theplaceforgood.com. And on the homepage, you'll see a virtual double date section right there on the front. And then click that and you will submit your email and we'll get back with you.
Yeah. I can't wait for that. Those are going to be so much fun.
I'm excited.
We love meeting you guys and getting to know you a little bit better. And so I think it's going to be super fun.
Yep. So we're talking about like serious conflict today, but I thought we'd intro with fun conflict that I feel like, because obviously like with any relationship, you're going to have the serious stuff, but I thought it would be funny just to talk through some of the conflict that we've had even in the first like 9-10 months of marriage. And even some of this goes into dating, of course, but so like the little petty conflicts that come with like living together, which I have a list. I don't know if you do.
I have made zero preparations for this, and I think that's extremely unfair because I could have made a list as well.
No, and actually the thing about these things is they're not right and wrong. It's just different, right? Okay, so the first one I remember noticing, we talked about this last week, but the toilet paper, we're on the same page with whether or not it goes over or under.
Which I never think about when I change it out.
We're over
I
people.
just put it in there, but I guess
Wait, but do you change it out or do you just sit the toilet paper on top of the other
Well, it depends how much of a hurry I'm
empty
in.
toilet paper? I'm just saying, I don't know that you've ever actually taken one off.
I do all the time.
Okay. Second one, and this drives me bananas. So the silverware, when we place it into the dishwasher for some reason. And if you're one of these people, like no judgment, I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. Like putting the silverware in, you put it up with like the part that goes in your mouth up.
I used to. I don't anymore.
Because of our relationship.
Yeah,
but
I got done with that fight. I'm like, it's not worth it.
Think about it. Because I know.
Just be grateful I loaded the dishwasher.
I know that there are tons of people that do this, and I just want to hear from you. Why do you do this? Couple reasons. If you've got your like knives, even your forks, sitting straight up and you're going down to grab them, like to empty it, ow.
No, I get that, especially with knives. I get that. You're right.
But number 2, like once they're clean and you're putting them up, you have to go grab the part that's going to go in your mouth.
Yep.
Okay, so we good now?
I guess. Can I get on mine?
Hold on. And then the other thing you don't like is for me to put like a fork in the front part. Like, you know how there's like the long...
You load in the back and you bring it forward. The back's the heart. You load in the back and you bring it forward.
But I'm going to put it in the most like accessible spot when I'm putting the dishes up.
That's laziness. It starts in the back and you work your way forward.
That's not a rule.
Isn't it funny how
It's
just
your
one
rule.
item, just a dishwasher, we can have disagreements about that.
That's what I'm saying. This is my point. Okay. What were you going to say about it?
We actually had a fight 10 minutes before we started this podcast today. And we're going to get into that conflict when we kind of dissect this whole fighting fair thing. So we're going to get into that in just a minute because it gets into one of my things about you and food noise and food sharing and just how anal you are about that stuff.
This is not about right and wrong. It's just different.
Agree. Yep.
So I was going with my list that's not right versus wrong. It's just different.
Yeah, I'm not saying that.
We're feeling spicy today. I don't know if y'all can tell. It's perfectly appropriate.
All right, let's save it because we're going to get into it in just a minute.
Okay.
You got anything else you'd like to?
Yeah, the third one that I noticed, it's not right or wrong. It's just different, is Loofah versus washcloth.
Yeah.
You're a loofah person.
I am.
And I'm a washcloth person. Like that's how I grew up. We had a cloth.
I have a manly loofah.
It's blue. It's blue. It is far from manly. Anyway, I just don't get it. Like it gets soap places, but I feel like you can't like scrub.
Well, you can't. I had this loofah that was very manly, and it looked like a mag wheel, and it had black sponge on the front, and then the back side was like this real rough surface. I don't even know what you'd use that for, but it felt really manly and just fit in your hand just right, like a little mini Frisbee. But now I just have a big fluffy one, but it's blue, so it's manly.
Sure. Okay, that's all I got. Oh,
Okay.
I have more, but I'll stop.
All right, well, let's get into this because we have a lot to cover. And this, I think, concept of conflict is a really important one. And I think it's important because, and you know what? The quality of our relationships depends not on whether or not we have conflicts. It's how we respond to the conflict, right? Because every relationship has conflict, should have conflict.
They should have conflict, yeah.
In fact, if you don't have any conflict, I'm more concerned about that.
Yeah.
So it's not, the conflict is not bad. The quality of the relationship comes down to how do we respond to conflict. And I think most of us, and I'll put myself at the top of this list, are pretty ill-equipped at how to handle conflict in the right way. So there's two basic ways that almost everybody responds to conflict. And this is an overgeneralization. Like if you're with a therapist who's going deep, they probably name 4 or 5, maybe 6 different ways that you handle conflict. But for our little 20-minute conversation, there's essentially 2 ways that most people respond. And both these ways, at the end of the day, are defense mechanisms because conflict is generally threatening to our system. It's perceived as a threat. Even people in your life that you think, oh, they love conflict, they gravitate towards conflict. Now, they might be addicted to conflict, but their system still perceives it as a threat. And so these 2 kind of extremes, if you will, are just 2 different defense mechanisms we have that we use to respond when conflict comes to our life. On one end, you have what we'll call flight. On the other end, you have fight, right? And so my question, and think about this as we have this conversation, is where do you land on that spectrum?
Yeah. Because a lot of times you think fight or flight, and you that phrase is often used in like, you know, if you're in a panic situation or if you're being threatened like physically, but it really does impact you as far as relationships and emotionally. Are you asking me if I'm fight or flight?
No, I want everybody to think about that in general.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you in just a minute.
Okay.
So I'll kind of break these down a little bit. The flight response are people who tend to use this response when they're more interested in avoiding than they are resolving conflict. What it typically looks like is they run, they avoid, they want to deal with it later, they busy themselves with something else. They become extremely productive with something that has nothing to do with the person they have conflict with or the issue of the conflict.
Right.
You're smiling because this is me. And I get extremely productive when we have conflict away from you and just doing something else. But yeah, so... And a lot of people who go towards flight are people who perceive all conflict as wrong or dangerous to the relationship. It might be because they grew up in a family where they never saw their parents fight or have any kind of conflict. And so they just think if they experience conflict in a relationship, that it means the relationship's doomed, it's going to fall apart. And again, we said this last week. We're kind of talking mostly about romantic relationships, but all this applies
Totally.
to all relationships, right? But, you know, I think for those of us who have a flight response, we're so afraid of conflict, we think that running away from it or burying it is a better way to deal with it. But conflict is not what destroys relationships. Unresolved conflict destroys relationships. And so avoidance is never the answer. Avoiding conflict is conflict.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right? It is.
Comes out in different ways.
Yep. So if you're someone who likes flight, you tend to either escape from conflict or you ignore conflict.
Think
Either
it'll
way,
go away.
Yeah, you just think it's going to go away. In other words, a lot of us were a lot more interested in peace faking than we are peacemaking. I think there's a whole lot of relationships out there that look real peaceful, but it's peace faking, not peacemaking.
And I bet that those relationships, both partners are flight. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, keep
For
going.
sure. Okay. Now, the fight response, this is kind of clear. I'll just spend a second on this. These are responses that are used by people who are more interested in winning than they are resolving. And what this tends to look like is anger, raised voices, proving a point, has to be right, attack. They kind of tend to be the more aggressive one. And again, essentially, whether you're a fight or flight, what you're attempting to do as a defense mechanism is create safety for yourself. So if you're fight, which you are, what you kind of convince yourself is that if I come hard enough at this other person, I'm going to create safety for myself. Like, because this other person is either going to submit or they're going to admit that I was right, but it creates this illusion of safety for you. You're protecting yourself with that fight response.
Yes. And to add some like just clarifying around that, and you could, I don't mean to do that just because it's mine. It's not a biased perception, but truly, like sometimes it's not you have to come at them or you're like aggressive. It truly can just be a very calm thing, but it's the addressing of the conflict that sometimes is fight, whereas a flight wouldn't even address it. So I don't want it for people listening, like if you're not like an aggressive person or you're not like a fighter, the fact that you bring it up and that you want to talk through it, I would say would mean that you're a fight, not a flight. Like it's not always this like
you lean more
high
towards
energy.
fight. I think it doesn't necessarily mean just because you bring it up that you're a fight. You can be, because some people aren't one extreme or the other. But if you're on the extreme of fight, you tend to be very aggressive.
Okay, that's more helpful. You hadn't said extremes yet.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
But again, I view it as a scale. And on one end, you have flight. On the other end, you have fight. In fact, I'll usually draw that out, put the two words apart and say, where are you on this line?
Okay, that makes more sense.
And that's kind of, most of us are somewhere in between. But again, if you choose fight, you're using that aggression or that volume, whatever, to create safety for yourself by controlling the other person. If you use flight, you're doing the same thing. You're trying to control the other person. You're trying to get rid of the conflict. Again, you're trying to create safety for yourself. And at the end of the day, most of us go towards flight or go towards fight for a variety of reasons. But the reason that we return to it over and over again in conflict is because to some degree it's worked for us. Right? It kind of gets us, at least short term, what it is that we want. You go to fight because the other person tends to submit, and that makes you feel good. You kind of get what you want. You go to flight because you run away, and the argument dissipates, and you think you get what you want. Again, it's all about kind of creating safety there. But even though it appears to work for you, what I would say is it works at the cost of the relationship. Neither one of those long-term is going to get you what you ultimately need. So I want everybody, as we talk about this, to kind of think through some questions. I'm going to ask you, Jordyn, some of these questions. But as I ask Jordyn these questions, I want you guys to be thinking about what your response might be to it.
Yeah.
All right? You ready? All right. The conflict style that I default to the most is what?
Fight.
Okay. The conflict style I think my partner defaults to the most is?
Flight.
Okay. How I respond to their default conflict style is?
I would say I probably, at the beginning, I push you into like trying to have the conversation and probably in an aggressive way, not physically, but just like not understanding.
She was very physical. She just beat the tar out of me.
No, just like, let's talk about this. Let's figure this out, pushing your buttons until you're just like done. And then once you do your flight thing and like peace out, then I mirror you.
Okay.
So that's mine.
All right. Next question. Does that response create connection or disconnection?
Disconnection.
Yeah. Creating connection while in conflict feels threatening because?
I think as a person who is on the fight end of the spectrum, it essentially means that I feel like I'm giving up on it. Like I'm giving up on it, or I don't think it's important to talk about, or almost like I'm letting you win, if that's really
it makes you feel out of control.
Yeah.
It makes you feel like vulnerable to stay connected inside of that conflict. So, and again, this is important because for both flight and fight, essentially, they do the same thing in a conflict. They break connection. So if you fight and I retreat, our connection is broken in that moment. If I flight and run from the argument, don't engage you in the conversation, it breaks connection. It breaks the intimacy. This is why sometimes, I don't know if you guys listen, if you've ever been in a fight before and you just said some god-awful things to the person that you love deeply, and later you were like, I can't believe I even said that. Like, I didn't mean that. I'm sorry I said that. And a lot of times, we think it's because we're so angry in an argument. The reality is it's because the connection has been severed. There's no connection there. You don't feel like you're in a relationship. You don't feel like you're connected to that person. So, of course, you can say all kinds of crazy things that you wouldn't say when you're actually connected to the other person. So here's the angle I want to take. I think whether you're fight or flight, you can make some adjustments to kind of change that, kind of dial it back a little bit, or if you're flight, maybe engage a little bit more. But for the most part, we have the style that we have. I don't think it's about trying to correct that. I think it's all about how do we initiate repair. I called this fighting fair, but it's really not that. I've heard for decades people talk about all the rules that they establish in a fight. That's great, and we'll talk about that for a second. But for the most part, when you're in a fight, the rules go out the window. So my question is whether you're someone who runs away from the conflict or whether you're someone who aggressively goes after the conflict, when the dust settles, how do you initiate repair? And in my opinion, that's where it's at. It's the quality of the relationship comes down to how do you initiate repair. So I'm going to give you 4 steps. And I have a lot of questions included in this, Jordyn. So if you're listening to this in a car, don't try to jot this down or put this in your phone. We actually created a worksheet for you guys so you can download that'll have all the highlights of this episode and it'll have all these questions. So I'm just calling it like the how to initiate repair worksheet.
Wow.
That's what I'm gonna call it. Just go to
theplaceforgood.com/conflict. You'll also see a button on our homepage, but if you go to theplaceforgood.com/conflict, you can get the worksheet.
You can get this worksheet, right? Because it's a lot of information.
It's free, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. 4 steps, all right? So the first thing I would say in initiating repair, which is the key, right? Whether you're flight or fight, how do you initiate repair? Number 1, sit down with your partner when you're not in conflict to explore how you want to handle things when you are in conflict. So we generally try to work through conflict when we're in it. And that was my point I was just making. And unless you're really far along in your self-growth, you're probably not going to be able to work through your conflict while you're in the conflict. It's just too heated. It gets off topic so quick, right? I say work through the conflict when you're not in conflict. This is your opportunity to set clear expectations and rules for when things get messy.
Yeah.
Now, you're probably going to break those rules sometimes, right? But I think establishing the guidelines and the rules, maybe there's like, you tell your partner, hey, don't ever say this. If you call me this, I'm going to freaking lose it, right? That when you're not in conflict is the time that you need to be setting forth those guidelines.
Yes. There's I remember us early in our relationship, I said, if you do this thing, this one thing.
That it's a word, I know.
Yeah. Well, that actually I know the word you're talking about, but there was an action. I was like, I'll just tell you, if you leave the house, or you ask me to leave the house, it triggers something in a past relationship that I had that this person, that is what he did, and he didn't come back.
Yeah.
And so that's where
I can't do that.
I don't. Yeah. So it's things like that. It's sometimes it has a deep connection to past baggage. So it's such a good conversation.
And you got to establish that when you're not in the conflict. So talk about conflict when you're not in conflict. That'd be the first thing I'd say about initiating repair. The second thing, and here the rest of these have more to do with what do you do when you're in the conflict, right? Number 2 is check in to see who wants to initiate repair. So sometimes repair can happen in the middle of the conflict, but usually, again, it's not happening in the middle of the conflict. That's the goal. The goal for all of us is to get to a place where we can initiate repair in the heat of the moment, but most of us aren't there yet. So what you have to figure out is after the conflict's over, can one or more of you initiate the repair? Often one person has been slightly more hurt than the other, or one person is just more pissed than the other one, right? And so the one who maybe has been hurt slightly less, maybe they're the one this time.
Or maybe you're the offender and you know it deep down. Yeah.
And you need to initiate the repair. Now, and listen, if you go in to check for repair and neither one of you are ready for it, then abandon it, right? It's not the time to
give
initiate
it
the
time,
repair.
yeah.
You're just initiating the fight. It's like phase 2. It's like refiring back up. So you got to wait till both of you are ready to initiate repair,
Yeah.
right? And somebody's got to take the lead in that. So third thing is this: when you're ready to initiate repair after conflict, here's how you bring it forward. Now, I think it would be great for us to use our own conflict here, Jordyn. And we got to do this pretty quick, but we got in a fight like just minutes ago before we did this thing. We were going to have lunch, and Jordyn had a plate of she had some chips, a lot of chips actually.
I
on
did
the
not have a
plate.
lot of chips.
There was quite a few chips, I thought. Here we go. There are chips.
Honestly. I am pregnant, you guys. Someone send help.
Chips in a sandwich. And I walked by. I wasn't ready to eat yet. I was going to eat like in a few more minutes. I picked up a single chip, just a single chip, to eat it. And I got the death stare, and then I got chewed out.
No. Oh my gosh.
It was a chewing out.
So dramatic. Let's talk
You're
about
like,
how.
don't eat my chip.
No. Let's talk about how it went. You said something. You're like, what do you? I think we were talking about like something with the podcast, and you're like, well, what would you prefer? And I said, I prefer you don't eat my lunch. That's all I said.
But
I
you said
prefer
it in
you
a
don't
really
eat my
mean
lunch.
way. I felt
So
squashed.
he took the chip and threw it down on
didn't
my
throw that.
set.
I
Yes, you
tossed-
did. It broke.
It did not break. The chip did not break.
It did.
It did not.
Yep, it did. Anyways,
I raged on the chip. I did not. I placed it
you
back.
did not place it. You
on
threw
the,
it.
on the mountain of chips.
He threw it.
Did you catch that? I said on the mountain of chips.
You're such a jerk.
Okay, so anyway,
Eating
and
for two.
I was hurt. I felt like I got called out, so I kind of walked out of the room. And anyway, so let's just take it because it's a simple conflict. Let's just take that and use that, all right? So when you're ready to initiate repair, this is step 3 after conflict. Here's how you bring it forward, all right? So let's say that you come to me. Let's say that you're going to be the bigger person here and say, I know that you're hurt, Pete, because I chewed you out.
I
or
asked
whatever.
you not to eat my lunch.
Yeah. And let's say you sit down with me and you're like, all right, Pete, I'm sorry that didn't go the way we wanted to. I want to initiate repair here. And then maybe you say a couple statements like this, and I'll put these on the worksheet, but maybe you say something like this. I took some time to think about what happened and why that was such a trigger for me when you grabbed that chip was.
You may answer.
Yeah.
So all morning I was kind of just irritable. My hormones are crazy right now. Stop smiling. But I was just irritable, and I felt like all morning he was making choices that didn't have me in mind. Like we were on the way to the gym, and you said that another person in our group could have the treadmill and not me because you just gave priority to that person. And I was like, that's fine, but like the only thing I do in there right now is a treadmill, so I already felt like kind of annoyed. And then we get to the gym and you're walking out before I can even get out of the car, and you're at the door, and I'm like, okay, I'm kind of annoyed. And then, but again, it's just those little things, and it was totally sweeping under the rug. But then the chip was like the thing. So I think what it felt like was I don't like when people eat my food.
Yep.
I say something every time you do it. And that was like the third thing of like, you're not thinking about me, which is so dumb because it was a chip, or it was so dumb because it was a treadmill. But it's like little things that kind of stack on top of not feeling like you're choosing me.
Okay. Here's what I understood about what I was feeling in that moment.
Not feeling seen or understood.
Okay. How I'd like to do that differently moving forward is
Let you eat the chip, and then afterwards just say, hey, I know I don't love it when you eat my food. Can you ask me next time?
what I think could help me that you could do differently is
Ask me to eat my food instead of just taking it.
yeah, that's good. Now, here's where I would turn this around. And after that, you should ask these 4 questions.
Okay.
And this may sound really rigid to some of you, but for those of us who just aren't, eventually there's going to be a time you don't need the worksheet and the questions, right?
It's just kind of a natural.
But this is what kind of helps prompt a lot of that. So
what did that
would you
experience remind you of?
that experience, it reminded me of being scolded as a kid. Like that's what it felt. I felt in that moment like I was 5 years old.
Okay.
And I'm like, hey, I helped buy these chips, right? Like Why can't I have a chip? You got a couple of them.
I've never known you to ever eat one chip. Okay. Number 2, what did you need from me in that space?
I think I needed for you in that space afterwards, after you said that, to just say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come across so aggressive there.
Okay. And then the third one, what do you think we need to do differently in order to maintain connection?
What I think we should do differently to maintain connection in that regard is I shouldn't have walked off.
Oh, yeah, we didn't tell
puffing.
people what you did.
No, I did. I said that.
Okay,
I walked
okay.
off huffing and puffing.
Yeah, for a good 45 minutes.
Well, I went to take a shower.
I know. But yeah, we didn't talk for 45 minutes.
Yeah, I needed some cool down time before I could initiate repair.
I know. That's why I asked you
Yeah.
questions.
Was that all of them? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think that, that kind of conversation, those kind of questions are what are key to just bringing about. Because, like, we could have, everybody's like, it's a chip. Yeah, we
Totally.
we get
It's a small
But
example.
those kind of things can pile up and become a mountain of not knowing how to. And if you can't process and initiate repair over a chip, what are you going to do down the road in your relationship when there's some serious conflict, right? Which we all have. And so you got to, I think, apply this framework of initiating repair to everything.
Yeah. Well, and as y'all just heard, it's not about the chip. And it never is. It's a deeper thing. And that deep thing is what impacts the big things, And so it's not feeling seen, known, or, addressed can be so much bigger. Like, I think a lot of times when we're fighting with our spouses, we only see the surface level of like the chip, or you left your stuff out again, or you left without saying goodbye and I love you again. Like, there's just so many other deep things that really are important to dig into.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And the fourth thing in the framework is checking with each other to see if you both feel heard and understood. So, like, I'll ask you, like, given our little argument, do you now feel heard and understood?
Yeah, now I do.
Okay.
After the questions,
And now you would ask me that.
Oh, Pete, do you feel heard and understood?
I do. I feel heard and understood. And I think that's, again, both of you need to be able to answer yes to that, or you got to go back up to step 2, really.
Yeah.
And work through it again. But ultimately, that's the goal: is both people feel heard, they feel understood, and now the connection is there. Even if you hadn't solved the whole thing, like,
Totally.
I still believe I should have been able to take the chip. You still believe I shouldn't have taken the chip. Mm-hmm. But despite that, the connection has been repaired until I try to take the chip again.
Which means you don't listen.
Right.
Okay.
But that's it. And again, that's such a quick crash course. I know conflict's a very in-depth thing, and some of us have a lot of baggage with it. But I think that framework, and I really want to encourage you to go download this, theplaceforgood.com/conflict, and get all those questions we just worked through and get that framework, because it can be really helpful.
Yeah.
And just apply it to your next argument, no matter how small or large it might be, and see where it takes you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm left turn here, but I feel like depending on what relationship you're in, I think you can change to whether you're fight or flight. Like, I know in my previous relationship, I was more of a flight person because the person I was with was more aggressive. And so it is interesting how, just depending on what your spouse or your boyfriend, girlfriend, whomever, like, whatever they are, it's almost like you counteract it. Like, that's just
Absolutely.
the tension itself. So you just kind of have to relearn how to initiate repair based on what relationship you're in.
And some people are going to have one defense mechanism for conflict in their marriage and have a different one at work.
Absolutely.
So you're going to it's going to be different per environment. That's why I say I'm not too worried about whether you're fight or flight. I'm not too worried about where you fall on the spectrum.
Just how you repair.
It's all about learn how to initiate repair, regardless of what your defense mechanism style might be when it comes to conflict. You got to learn to initiate repair. And if you can initiate repair, then what happens is conflict gets moved out of this bad thing that's doing damage to your relationship, and it moves into this category of actually helping you develop a deeper level of intimacy.
Yeah.
We all know our best relationships are relationships where we've had to work through conflict and we've come out the other side stronger. But what that requires is working through conflict in a healthy way.
And both of you have to be on board for repair. If one of you's on board, then you have resentment. So it's just like having that vulnerability to both of you be honest.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay, so that's part 2 of relationship goals.
Yep, absolutely. And don't forget, if you want that worksheet, it's theplaceforgood.com/conflict. Again, it feels kind of formal, but don't let that scare you away from it. Like it's just address it casually, and hopefully eventually it just becomes kind of second nature and routine.
Yeah. And I would say too that this is a good one. Like I know a lot of you probably listen to this by yourself, and maybe your boyfriend or girlfriend or roommate or friend, parents, husband, wife, whatever, they don't listen to it with you. I would share this one with them.
Yeah.
Especially if you have some issues when it comes to conflict. I would share this one, let them listen to it, and then maybe introduce the worksheet to them.
Yeah, that would give it more context for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Good
And
stuff.
it'd be super helpful. But yeah, we all know somebody that struggles with conflict in a relational context that this might be helpful for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you guys as always. I hope it's been super helpful. And this series, Relationship Goals, we have a couple cool surprises coming up.
Oh yeah, we've got a fun interview that
Yeah.
you guys are gonna love.
I can't wait.
Okay. Yeah,
All right.
good stuff, guys.
Yep. So may the Lord bless you and protect you. May he smile on you and be gracious. May he show you his favor and give you his peace.